Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Amy's Bookshelf. So today I am going to do my May wrap up. Given that my last video was called My Middle Grade May, we love some alliteration, I kind of want to call this one my monstrous May wrap up because it was pretty mad how many books I read in May. I'm looking at the pile down there. Normally in my wrap ups I hold them up. I cannot hold that many books. I think there's 17. Honestly crazy. I think I can really attribute it to the fact that I read a lot of middle grade, which tend to be quite fast because obviously it's a younger audience, so I did get through a lot of those that weren't actually on my monthly TBR, and then somehow managed to get through pretty much all of my monthly TBR as well. So here we are. I'll take you through them one by one. If I have a review for them, as normal, I will put it in the description below so you can check out some more of my thoughts. I won't go into them in too much detail because otherwise this video will be like an hour long. So I'll just give you a little overview, a little bit about my thoughts, whether I enjoyed it and whether I think you should read it too. Perfect. So I'm going to do it in chronological order. I literally have my laptop open with Goodreads as well as the pile of books because some of them I've given back to the library, and I think the easiest way to do it would be to do it in order so I can show you that actually I have lifted it up. You ready? And this isn't all of them because I think there's at least 3 from the library, if not maybe 4. Yeah. How I did it? Who knows? Okay, so book number 1. I started it on the plane when we flew out to New York, which I think was the 25th of April, and I pretty much finished it mostly in April, but I didn't actually finish it till like the first day of May, which is why it's in this wrap up. But again, kind of a cheat because I was only reading it for about one day of May. But anyway, here we are. So this is Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Sujimura. This was one that I had actually been offered to do a review or exposure for it way back when it was published, I think in April 2021. I declined it because there was no budget and I don't like doing things for free. But I was really intrigued by the book, so I was kind of gutted that I couldn't work with them on it because it just really sounded up my street. And then once everybody had started talking about the book, there were floods of good reviews, people were raving about it, which made me even more excited, so I eventually did get a copy, I think at the beginning of this year, and then finally got around to reading it last month. So it's a bit of a unique concept. It's sort of light fantasy / magical realism, but don't get too hung up on that because, as I'm sure you're all aware, I'm not a fantasy person, so I would not recommend you anything that's too heavy on the fantasy. So this is basically about a group of Japanese school children. It is set in Japan, obviously, and it is a translation. Let me just tell you, the translator is Philip Gabriel, and it centres on these school children who basically all convene in a castle which they access through the mirrors in their bedroom. So one day mirrors start glowing, they walk through the mirrors and they all kind of group together in this castle. None of them know each other previously, though they're all kind of around the same age, and they bond over the fact that they're not at school for various reasons, and it becomes clear that that most of them are struggling for one reason or another, and I think that was the main thing I liked about this book. I think in my review I talk about how the age of this group of children was really interesting because they were kind of like young teenagers. They were like, I think 12, and I found that really fascinating because I think often we explore the ideas of like loneliness and isolation and even depression in teenagers, because I think, you know, as everybody goes through puberty, you're experiencing a lot of hormonal changes. Also, school is stressful, so you know there's often stories you explore in that age range. But what was really interesting was this was actually younger, and I thought that was even more interesting because that age is sort of this weird limbo where you realise that you're not a child anymore. You don't have the blissful ignorance of childhood, but you're not also quite yet an adult either. And so like I said, it's this weird limbo, and what this book does brilliantly is explore the issues that these children are facing at the moment. And I won't go into too much detail about the plot because, to be honest, it wasn't very plot driven. It sounds like it should be, but it isn't, so there's not much to tell and I don't want to spoil anything. But overall I would recommend this book. However, I think in the end I only rated it 3 stars, probably more like 3.5, and that is simply because it just didn't meet my expectations. I think that's probably what it boils down to. Like I said, it's light fantasy, so I was excited about the premise because it was very different, it was very unique. I'd not seen a book like it before. It's also translated, which I love, but it just felt lacking, you know. Oh, this cool concept. Oh, they're all in a castle. Oh my god, how did they get there? Oh, blah blah blah. By the end, did I really care? Did I really feel satisfied? No. There is a very cool twist at the end, won't go into that because spoilers, but I did really enjoy that bit, so that somewhat redeemed it. But I'm afraid for me, I just wanted a bit more and I didn't get it. So I definitely would recommend this book. I'm still going to recommend this book because I do think it's a brilliant exploration of, like I said, loneliness, mental health struggles, isolation in a really unique setting with this group of children. But yeah, it wasn't a 5-star read for me, unfortunately. But that was my first read of May. And secondly, I read Paul Kalanithe's When Breath Becomes Air. Now, this is a memoir, and straight off the bat I'm going to tell you it's pretty heavy going because Paul unfortunately died in, I think, 2015, managed to write most of this memoir before he did, and then his wife Lucy finished the rest of it after he died. So it was published posthumously. I always struggle with that word, posthumously, I think, so after he died. So yeah, the book has a really heavy feeling to it. I think it's a really strange feeling, for want of a better word, of going into a book knowing that the protagonist isn't going to survive. So I should say Paul wrote this after he was diagnosed with lung cancer. He was, I think, about early 30s, and by the time he dies he's about 36, I think. And so it's, yeah, his life and about his career choices. He's always wanted to be a writer, but he actually ends up becoming a neurosurgeon. He was clearly such a brilliant person with an incredible mind, and yeah, eventually finds a career in neuroscience, but does always have this calling to become a writer, and then is unfortunately diagnosed with lung cancer. So this was his way of exploring that outlet while he still could. So yeah, like I said, it's really heavy going. It's very emotional, and there's no getting away from that because, you know, for obvious reasons, it's never going to be a light read no matter how you look at it. However, I do think that it was one of the best memoirs I've read in terms of not only its honesty and its rawness, but just the brilliance of the way that Paul writes it. And like I said before, he was such a brilliant person, and he had this refreshing and fascinating outlook on the world, and I really loved that. He was just constantly throughout his life trying to explore these deep questions, you know, why are we here, what happens after we die? And obviously this book doesn't answer any of those questions, but I loved the exploration and I loved going on that journey with him. So yeah, like I said, fascinating memoir, but don't go into it lightheartedly. But I did give this 5 stars because it was pretty good. Next up we have Box Hill by Adam Mars Jones. This is a Fitzcarraldo edition, which I have 3 of, I think. So the back of this fascinated me. It's basically set in the 1970s in somewhere called Box Hill, and it's about a boy on his 18th birthday who runs into this biker called Ray, and essentially their story. I didn't really have many expectations going into this, except for the fact that I really wanted it to be like Tin Man by Sarah Winman, and I can say with complete certainty it is nothing like Tin Man. So if you want that, this is not the book that's going to give you that. And I think, having now finished it, I did go into it perhaps a little naively. I'm not the kind of person that tends to read reviews before I read a book, and maybe I should have done, because I would have had very different expectations going into it. So yeah, on the plus side, what I really liked about this book is it was basically a huge stream of consciousness. If anyone's a fan of Alan Bennett, or you've seen any Alan Bennett monologues, this felt like that. Just a really long monologue read by Colin, who is basically just telling you about his life, his relationship with his parents, with his friends, with Ray, and what happens in the aftermath of that. And so I really loved how rambling it felt, and because it was so rambling it felt very real, which I really enjoyed. And yeah, having just Colin's perspective was really fascinating as well. And yeah, what's really interesting about that is that obviously we only ever see Colin's perspective, and there's definitely moments, especially once you finish reading, where you realise that Colin is definitely naive. He looks at the world with maybe rose-tinted glasses, and his experience with Ray is maybe not the same as he perceived it at the time. Don't want to give too much away, but what I will say is there is quite a few graphic descriptions of explicit sex as well as submission and domination sex, which I was not expecting going into this, but I will say that if that's not something you want to read, it's definitely not something that persists throughout the entire book, but it is quite a short book, so there are quite a few like quite a big percentage of it is that, and it's, yeah, focused on for a little while. So yeah, I really did enjoy it. I thought it was really refreshing because it was such a different style, because it was basically just this one stream of consciousness, which I really enjoyed as a narrative. And I actually listened to some of it as an audiobook, and I thought that was really interesting as well, again because it harps back to the idea of it being like an Alan Bennett monologue or something similar. So yeah, I think in the end I gave this 4 stars, just because it probably disappointed my heart, being that I wanted it to be something like Tin Man and it definitely wasn't that. However, overall I did really enjoy it, so I would recommend it, and I'm excited to read more of these editions. Then up next I have Crying in H-Mart by Michelle Zorner. This is a memoir, if you've not heard of it before. So Michelle is Korean American, and it is basically the story of her mother, who was diagnosed with cancer and eventually dies, and Michelle exploring her identity after her mother's death. So going into this, I didn't really know much. I knew that it was going to be emotional, obviously given the nature of the subject matter, but what I really liked about it was, again, the exploration of identity from Michelle. So has Korean and American parents, and so she's always sort of wrangled with her identity a little bit and maybe never felt like she's fit in one place. But once her mother dies, she feels like she doesn't have these ties to her Korean identity like she did while her mother was still alive. Things like she can't speak the language fluently, she doesn't know all the recipes, for example, that her mother used to make her. So while her mother was dying and going through the treatment, she kind of wanted to cling to that, she wanted to learn it so that after her mother was gone she was able to continue with it. Obviously it's not something everybody can relate to, but I did really enjoy listening to the way she pulled that apart. The other great thing about this book is the food in it. I was just salivating, honestly, the entire way through. There was a lot of food. I'm not particularly familiar with a lot of Korean dishes, but there was so much in here that I just wanted to eat as soon as I heard descriptions of it or listened to the recipe. So yeah, that was really cool as well, and a lot of people say the same. So yeah, obviously similarly to When Breath Becomes Air, it's not something to go into lightheartedly because it does deal with death and grief, but I really did enjoy it, and actually I think I preferred it even more than When Breath Becomes Air, so I did give this 5 stars and I would really recommend it. Okay, and then next we have one from the library which I no longer have, which is The Weight of Water by Sarah Crossan. So I'm just looking at my laptop. This was in my middle grade wrap up. I'm not going to talk about it much. I'm not going to talk about many of the middle grade much because this video would be an hour long and you can just go watch that video instead. I will link it here and I'll link it in the description as well. So yeah, this was poetry. It explored, again, similarly to the last one, identity, but also the immigrant experience, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was very well written, it was very beautiful, and it explored really deep ideas even though the protagonist was so young. So I would definitely recommend this one, but go and watch my other video if you want to hear more of my thoughts. And then some more middle grade. I read the first 3 of the series of Unfortunate Events series, so The Bad Beginning, The Reptile Room, and the third one I'll put here is back in the library. Oh, what's that one called? You can like see me looking at the cover, but I can't actually see the cover, so I don't know what it's called. The Wide Window, that's what it is. So yeah, again, won't speak about them much because you can go watch the video, but these were brilliant. I've got the next 3 out of the library already because I want to continue with the rest of the series. For middle grade books, they just were so fun. Really, like, adventure was at the core of them, which I loved, and I loved how they were trying to educate their young readers as well in like certain words and ideas and idioms, and I feel like as a child and as an adult you can get a lot out of these books, so I will definitely be continuing with the series. Again, go watch the video if you want to hear more about those. I'm pretty sure I gave them all 5 stars. Oh, and The Weight of Water I think I gave 4 stars. So after that I read Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. I did speak about this again in the middle grade one, though I did caveat in that video that I don't actually think this should be classified as middle grade, it's more young adult. This is the prequel to Pet by Akwaeke Emezi, which is definitely middle grade, because its protagonist Jam is I think around like 13, so it definitely feels more middle grade. This one, however, which like I said is the prequel and is about Pet's parents or Pet's mother, Bitter, and I think, I can't remember specifically, but I think Bitter is about about 16 in this, and it definitely feels older as well, and a little more mature. So yeah, that was kind of the caveat. It shouldn't really have been included in that video, but I didn't kind of know that going in, so that's why it ended up being there. But yeah, I really loved this book. If you're familiar with Pet is set in this like utopian future, and Bitter explores basically how the world ended up in that utopian future. So this is kind of a dystopia before the utopia happened. But yeah, go again, watch the video so you can hear all of my thoughts. But I love the way that it explored identity, disability, and again, just such a brilliant and refreshing narrative from Akwaeke Emezi, which had so much to give, as all of their books do. They are definitely one of my favourite authors, so you will always hear me raving about their books. But this is also one to add to your TBR, as well as Pet, if you haven't read either of them. Okay, then next up we have Melt My Heart by Bethany Rutter. So this was a cute romance. I wanted a cute romance, so I thought I would pick this one up. Did it fulfill my expectations? Did I enjoy it? No. Was very disappointed, unfortunately. So it's like I said, it was supposed to be like just a quick fun romance. It's set in an English seaside town. I'm not actually sure whether it's named, but yeah, it doesn't matter, in an English seaside town, and it is about the protagonist Lily, who is about to go to university, and she is kind of struggling with basically what has been laid out before her, whether she actually wants to go to university. She's thinking a lot about her future and yeah, what she wants to do. She has a twin sister called, yes, Daisy. Her twin sister is called Daisy, and throughout her life she has always felt very compared to Daisy. So yeah, it's basically about her kind of dealing with her future, which is a very relatable narrative, I think, for a lot of young people, and actually just for people in general. Even if you can't relate to the university part of it, you can probably apply it to other parts of your life. So I will start with the things I liked about it. It was great for representation and great for being an empowering book about body image. Lily is fat, and throughout the book there are constant kind of reminders, especially from her best friend Cassie, about reaffirming the notion that, you know, you are the only one that should have control and right to say anything about your own body, and to try and embrace that and be confident in it. So it was definitely great for that, and I also think in the hands of a young reader it would obviously be a brilliant and empowering novel in that respect too. It was also great because the protagonist and her best friend are bisexual as well, so it had great representation from that point of view. However, that is kind of where the positives end, for me at least. So like I said, I had great representation. It was definitely trying to do something, but in terms of the plot, not sure. So the vague plot, even though I've kind of just explained it but not really, is Lily thinking about what she's going to do at university. She ends up meeting a guy who I think is from New Zealand, and he's travelling here, and she flirts with him and kind of starts a sort of relationship with him. And then on the other hand, she's also, her relationship with Daisy, her sister, isn't very good because of the body image thing, because of the comparison thing. And then her best friend Cassie, she runs an ice cream stand with her, and Cassie also meets another boy, so she's kind of starting a relationship with him. But then Cassie also keeps finding these like xenophobic posters up in the town, so it's about them kind of deal with that. And to be honest, I feel like everything was just spread way too thin. There were like so many different things, and were any of them actually ever like properly explored and resolved? No, I don't think so. The poster thing really was weird. I felt like the author was trying to like tick some kind of, I don't want to say diversity box, but it was like, oh, I've addressed fat phobia and I've addressed homophobia, now let's address racism. And I'm not saying that's what the author was trying to do, but that's how it felt, because it was never really properly explored. It didn't really have like a concrete ending. It felt very superficial, and so I didn't really understand that part of the plot. And then her and Cassie, her best friend, I enjoyed their relationship, and like I said before, I think there were moments that were really brilliant, especially in the hands of a young reader. But again, at the same time, it felt so underdeveloped. Things seemed to transpire and happen and progress within like half a page, and I was like, where was the build-up, you know? Where was the subtlety in like laying the groundwork for this and then something happening? But it was like, boom, it just came out of nowhere. I don't really want to go into detail again because I don't want to spoil it, but I just, by the end, felt very frustrated with this book because I think it could have been great and it just wasn't. So if you have read it, I would love to discuss it with you. I have written a full review, so you can go read that if you want to hear more of my ramblings about why I didn't like this book. But yeah, it was a real shame because I was looking forward to it. I'm pretty sure Bethany Rutter has written another book, so I could give that one a go, but I probably won't anytime soon, just in case it's of a similar nature. But yeah, I think in the end I gave that 2 stars. Yeah. Okay, oh no, next up we actually have another library book. So next was The Apple Tart of Hope by Sarah Moore Fitzgerald. Yeah, so like I said, this one's from the library. Again, it's another middle grade one, so I'm not going to talk about it much because you can go watch that video. This one explored a lot of ideas surrounding mental health, bullying, being a kid. Was quite great, really. It was a very cute storyline, but at the same time it actually got really dark in places, and I say that in the video, but I think it kind of needed to, given that they were discussing things like suicide, which is a hard thing to tackle with a middle grade book, but I think it's a really important thing to do because of how impressionable the readers of the book will be. So yeah, really love that one. I either gave it 4 stars or 5 stars, I can't remember, but again, go watch the video. You'll be a fool not to, because I'll tell you much more about that book there. Okay, so then next I read How We Disappeared by Jing Lee. This is historical fiction, and it is about the Japanese occupation of Singapore during World War II. I actually listened to this one as an audiobook because it was on Scribd. If you want to sign up for 2 months free of Scribd, I'll leave it in the description below. This isn't an ad, but if you sign up to get 2 months for free, I get a month for free. So it's win-win. So I'll leave that there if you do want to sign up for Scribd. It's basically an audiobook service, but unlike Audible, you can have unlimited audiobooks for the amount you pay. The library isn't unlimited, but there are a lot of options on there, so it's not like you're going to be struggling to find something to read. But like I said, you can get a free trial, and then if you don't like it, you can just cancel it. So go look at that link. So yeah, this was, like I said, World War II, and it was pretty heavy. There's a lot of difficult scenes and a lot of emotional scenes as well. So similarly to some of the books I've already discussed, it's not one to go into lightheartedly. Like a lot of World War II, World War I books, it jumped in time, which I don't know why, a lot of books set around that time tend to do it. So it jumped between World War II and about the year 2000, so a little while later, but had the same characters kind of discussing their life before and after. The actual narrative itself, I think, flicks between 3 people. Let me double check. So yeah, Wang Di, I think there's a guy called Kevin, and who's the third one? Or maybe it's just Kevin and Wang Ti. Do you know what? I could be lying. I think it might just be those 2. But there are a lot of other characters, so it feels like more than just them. Yeah, it was this really beautiful storyline, despite the fact that it had some really harrowing subject matter and scenes, but what I really loved about the beauty of it was how the timelines came together. They were weaved together in a really subtle way. It wasn't immediately apparent how people were linked and how they knew each other, or their relationship to each other, or you know, why it was relevant, but by the end you kind of understood how the thing came together as a whole, and that's what I really liked about it. I also think it's really important to read World War I, World War II books that aren't set in Europe, because it's a world war. It happened pretty much everywhere, so it is really important to kind of hear more about the stories. That obviously this is a fictional book, but I'm sure there was a lot of research that went into it about real life stories and how they were affected during World War II. So yeah, I would really recommend this one. I think I gave it 4 stars in the end, just because in places it felt a little bit long, so perhaps it could have been a little bit shorter, but I do think as well that was probably to do with the way that the book was exploring how the characters developed given what they'd been through, the trauma that they'd experienced, and how that kind of was carried with them throughout their life. So it was fair enough that it was a little bit long. But yeah, I would really recommend that, and if you do get Scribd, I'd recommend the audiobook as well. Okay, next up we have White Teeth by Zadie Smith. So similarly to the first book, this one is kind of a cheat, because I believe I started reading it in March. I think it was March. It was a long time ago. This is a really long book, and it is not worth it. I'm sorry. I know Zadie Smith is like one of those... Oh my god, I've still got a bookmark in it. I did finish it, but maybe I used more than one. Zadie Smith is one of those people who I feel is like a contemporary classic writer. I think this was published about the year 2000, so it was over 20 years ago now, and I know Zadie Smith is beginning to be taught in schools and at universities, and I'm sure there are plenty of good reasons why. I know a lot of people love Zadie Smith. I've never read a book by her before, and I'm not sure I'll be jumping to read one again. This book was really interesting. It's actually not similar to How We Disappeared, but it was similar in the way that it had different narrators. So there are actually 4 parts to this book, and it's 4 different characters, all of whom are kind of weaved into each other's storylines as well, so they are all vaguely related to each other, so the characters crop up in all of them, but yeah, 4 very distinct parts with 4 different voices, and it spans well, it spans probably over 100 years, because actually we go right back to the beginning of the 20th century, 1900s, so it does jump around in time a lot. We go into World War I, World War II, we talk about right into the present day, which again was about the year 2000, so yeah, there's a lot of time jumping, but yeah, overall I was just bored, and this is one of those interesting books. It explores a lot about kind of like British identity, it explores a lot about race, about families, about relationships with each other, platonic, romantic, friendship. There was like a lot of ground to cover, and I'm not saying Zadie Smith did it badly, because she is a really good writer, but I wasn't invested in anybody. The characters aren't particularly likeable, probably because they were trying to be realistic and plausible, and I think part of the charm of this is that it kind of shows the raw and unfiltered version of human nature, but unfortunately that just means that nobody was likeable. I didn't like anyone, and therefore I didn't really care about what was happening to them or their storyline. So overall I just didn't really enjoy this, and that coupled with the fact that it is literally over 500, nearly 550 pages, it's a slog. It just felt like a real slog. So I think in the end I gave this about 3 stars, which was probably being generous, but I did finish it, so something pushed me through. But yeah, it's not one that I'm going to be like jumping to recommend to people. But if you are a Zadie Smith fan and you do like her, then feel free to start a conversation with me, because I will happily be convinced to read other books by her if you think this was an anomaly, or maybe I just didn't understand it. I just wanted something to enjoy, and that just didn't tick those boxes, unfortunately. So yeah. Okay, and next up we have One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This was the book club pick for May for my book club. If you would like to sign up to my book club, please look at the description, the link is there. So I loved Daisy Jones and I loved Evelyn Hugo, which are both by Taylor Jenkins Reid as well, so I was excited to delve into another book by her. Unfortunately, however, I did not enjoy this book. Neither did most of the people in my book club, which is quite interesting. It made for a really fascinating discussion, to be fair, because we were all just ripping it to shreds. So the book is a romance primarily, kind of. We'll go with that. But it's kind of like a love triangle. So the protagonist Emma meets her high school sweetheart Jessie when she's like 17, 18. They are together for ages, like almost a decade. They get married, and on the eve of their first wedding anniversary, Jessie is in a helicopter crash and presumed dead. So Emma obviously has a lot to deal with. She's absolutely devastated. He is her soulmate, and she takes a long time to recover, and a couple of years later she begins to recover and kind of let herself back into the world, and she rekindles her friendship with another guy from high school called Ben. Is it Ben? Sam. Yeah, 3 letters, same name. So Sam, and she rekindles this friendship, which eventually turns into a romance, and they are engaged about a year later. And then Jesse reappears. He turns up, he's alive, and Emma doesn't know what to do. That's the premise. It's essentially a love triangle. I love a romance. I kind of love the idea of soulmates. I like a dramatic, I will die for you kind of storyline. So I thought this would be that. However, I just kept getting hung up on the implausibility of the whole thing. Firstly, what annoyed me is that Sam and Jessie were like these 2 angels who could literally do no wrong. They were like perfect human beings that would do anything for Emma. And I was like, where's their flaws, you know? They're human beings, where's their flaws? They must do something wrong, but they just didn't. They were perfect, which obviously made Emma's choice really difficult, because you kind of want one of them to come out and do something horrible so that she's like, not you, I'll choose the other one. Never happened, so that made her decision really hard. And then there's Jessie's time spent on this island. So this isn't really a spoiler because we know that he comes back, so you can kind of put together the pieces of where he was. But he was essentially shipwrecked on, oh, I mean not shipwrecked because he was actually in a helicopter crash. Heli-wrecked. I made that up. Heli-wrecked on well, it's what this is the thing. The author then even goes as far as being like, it wasn't even an island, it was basically a rock. And he's gone 3 years. And we're supposed to believe, on his own, he not only survived on this rock in the middle of the ocean, but when he returns, he's like fully sane, physically capable, because there are moments he literally picks up Emma and walks up the stairs, mentally very capable. He's not like talking to himself. He's very much there in the same capacity he was before he left. Obviously, he's a little bit traumatised, but like 3 years and you're telling me he's fine? No. No, sorry, no. I watched this show on Amazon Prime called The Wilds. It's really good, would recommend it if you haven't seen it. They're shipwrecked on there for, again, they're not shipwrecked, it's a plane crash. What do you call it when it's not a ship? Plane wrecked on an island. And they're there for like, you know, I mean, obviously the show, I don't want to spoil it, but let's say they're there for 4 weeks and they're like driving each other insane. They're like probably about to commit murder. There's clearly a lot they're going to have to unpack if they ever make it to back to normal society again. And like, he was there 3 years on his own. I just couldn't get past it. I'm sorry. So this book was 2 stars. I actually feel really passionately about how much this book annoyed me. And don't get me wrong, I'm 100% going to read the rest of Taylor Jenkins' Read backlog. I'm really looking forward to Malibu Rising. I will happily read all of the other ones, but this just, no, sorry. I'm like, who at the publishers read this and was like, yeah, let's publish it. Great book. That makes complete sense. Can see that happening. No, sorry. And that concludes that one. Oh gosh, there's more bad ones. I'm so sorry. I mean, when you read this many books in a month, there's always going to be like really good and really bad. It's just all the bad seem to come at the same time. So next up is Verity by Colleen Hoover. I read It Ends With Us back in February, I think. Loved it, adored it, was so excited for more Colleen Hoover. It Ends With Us is, again, I don't want to label it as a romance. There are romantic elements. It's probably more contemporary. That's a safer label. This is a thriller. So different genre. So maybe that's why I didn't like it. But again, the implausibility of this plot was just... So, Loan is a writer and she is approached by a guy called Jeremy, whose wife was in a car accident and is now incapable of finishing this series of books which she had been contracted to do by her publisher. So his wife is called Verity and she's quite a famous author, and so Loan is honoured to be offered the chance to finish Verity's books. So she goes to their house to look through the manuscripts and Verity's office and obviously just get a sense for how she's going to finish these books, whether Verity had anything planned, etc, etc. When she gets to the house, it quickly transpires that Verity's actually there in a bed. She's in some kind of coma, so she can't, she can't speak, she can't move, but she is alive on either life support or, she's hooked up to some machines. So obviously Loan finds that a bit weird. And then because it's a thriller, things start happening. Loan is pretty sure Verity's faking it. There are things she's reading in Verity's office, like parts of her manuscript and her autobiography where she is like, what on earth is going on? So she doesn't trust anyone. Like I say, because it's a thriller, things start happening. There's a lot of trigger warnings for this book, let me say. There's a lot of weird, dark stuff. And if I can get past the implausibility of the plot, which I won't really go into because it kind of is spoilers, what just really, just the cherry on top of this disaster was the ending. I can't tell you because it will spoil this book, but it was so bad. Just, yeah, I wasn't a fan. I didn't like it. I didn't understand it. It felt like a cop-out. It felt like this was just unfit, like just Colleen Hoover was like, I can't be bothered to write this anymore. Should we just wrap it up? Not only that, Colleen Hoover's actually publishing an extended chapter or like an extra chapter to this book, and I can only think that the reason she is doing that is because so many people were so annoyed with this ending that they were like, we need more of an explanation, and that's why she's doing it. So yeah, just no, not a fan again. Sorry, it just was bad. It was bad. I didn't like it. I think I gave it 2 or 3 stars, and there's another bad one to come. This video is getting very emotional. I can promise after this one bad one there's a good one and then an okay one, so I'll maybe end on the good one so we end on a bit of a high. But next up we have Barbara Kingsolver's Unsheltered. This bad boy is 522 pages. It's a long one. Was it worth the time? No. Would I recommend reading it? No. It's historical fiction. Great premise. Again, with a lot of these books, great premise. It's set in this house in somewhere in America. Can't remember. One of the M's maybe. Massachusetts? Who knows? Doesn't matter. And it's about this family who live in this house which they inherited from an aunt, I think. So they're going over there to basically empty it out, maybe do it up, live in it, blah blah blah. The chapters alternate between that family and a family who lived there 100 years ago, and they kind of become linked because the modern family are trying to look into the history of the house in order to because they're not very financially capable of doing up the house, like doing the work that needs to be done to the house in order to restore it. So they're trying to find out if it has any significant history in order to convince the council to pay for the restoration because it's historically significant. Yeah. My top tip for this, which I spoke about on Instagram when I did a reel and on TikTok, was you can just skip every other chapter because I was only interested in the modern day storyline. The old one was really boring, and what was a shame is the old one is actually based on some fact. So that should have been the more interesting one, but it really wasn't. I was really struggling to even like follow the storyline of those chapters, so no. And then the modern one, like, was somewhat interesting. There was quite a lot going on. It was obviously like an interesting family dynamic. There's, you know, bits about found family as well as like dealing with your blood relatives. There was a lot going on. The characters, again, kind of similar to White Teeth. They were very unlikable, and they kept like having these political conversations, and there were like a lot of remarks made in the like narrative stream that like just didn't feel very ironic. So now I'm not sure whether Barbara Kingsolver really like subscribes to the same morals and ethics that I do. I'm being a bit vague again because I don't really want to like go into too much detail for not wanting to spoil it, but yeah, overall this was too long. Like if it had been some novella maybe. But like, where was my investment in this plot for it to be 550 or however many pages I said it was, 520 something pages? Like, it just was not there. So no, sorry, wouldn't recommend this one. Okay, final two. Sorry, I feel like I'm being very negative. I'm gonna try and put some positive energy back into this video. So I'll start off with the meh one, even though these are actually the wrong way round, but I'll start off with the meh one so then we can finish on a high. So the meh one was Out of the Blue by Sophie Cameron. This was supposed to be in my middle grade May video, but again, similar to Bitter, once I started reading it, I kind of realised it's not middle grade, it's young adult, so I didn't end up talking about it in detail in that video. So it's, like I said, young adult. It's very, very light fantasy, and it is a sapphic storyline, and it is basically about a girl called Jaya who, actually, let's not start with Jaya. In the world, these angels start falling from the sky. Nobody can work out why. When they land, they die, so nobody can speak to the angels or work out what's happening. Obviously, people become really fascinated about when the next one's going to fall, where are they coming from, why is it happening, etc, etc. Go back to Jaya, her dad becomes obsessed with finding one of these angels and researching it or selling it, or, you know, just finding out more. Jaya's mum recently passed away, so he's kind of, well, they're all grieving for that, but he is kind of focusing his bereavement into this angel stuff. Jaya has recently broken up with her girlfriend and not really understood why that happened, and so all of the family end up going to Edinburgh to try and find an angel, and then Jaya's on a walk one day and an angel literally falls by her feet, and not only does it do that, but it is alive. So it is about Jaya trying to hide this angel from her father and the rest of the world while trying to communicate with it and work out why it happened, and then it's also to do with Jaya and her ex-girlfriend as well as her mum who died, and there's quite a lot going on. It was a really cool storyline, really cool premise. I liked Jaya. I thought her, you know, the way she spoke about grief, the way she spoke about her relationship with her ex-girlfriend, her own identity, the relationship she had with her father, with her sister, with her friends. All great, all interesting. Where I had issues with was the angel part. Like I said, this wasn't a bad book. I said it was a meh book because I think it needed another 50 pages to really go into detail about the angels. I think perhaps the author wants to leave it ambiguous because trying to explain why angels are falling out the sky is quite a tall order. Even if it's a fiction book, you still want it to feel believable, and I think coming up with an explanation for that is quite hard. That's probably why she didn't really do it. So by the end, I just felt a little bit unsatisfied. I wanted, like I said, more of an explanation. I wanted to know more about these angels, and it just never happened. We never got that. So yeah, that was probably my main disappointment with this book and why it wasn't rated more highly. I think I gave it 3, but it's probably like a 3.5. So yeah, if you want something that's kind of unique YA storyline, I would recommend it, but otherwise I wouldn't be racing to go get it. Okay, one more book, and this one we will end on a high. So this is Anna on the Edge. Again, this was in my middle grade wrap up, so I don't need to go into it in a lot of detail. My friend Jazz from Travels and Fiction gifted this to me for my birthday because she knew I was reading a lot of middle grade books this month, or last month, sorry. So she, yes, gave this to me, and this was just brilliant. Like I said, go watch the other video so you can hear about my thoughts properly, but it's basically about the protagonist Anna, who is a figure skater. She's, I think, 12 years old, and she is exploring her identity and coming to terms with the fact that she thinks she might be non-binary. So yeah, there was kind of 2 parts to this, her and her identity, and talking about being non-binary, and that representation was brilliant, and also the figure skating was really cool. So the author AJ Sass was a figure skater, or is a figure skater, so yeah, like their love for figure skating really came through in this book, which I really enjoyed. I love it when an author is passionate about something and like really puts it into the book. So that was brilliant, obviously, as well as Anna and her exploration of her identity. So yes, would recommend that one. Go watch my other video if you want to hear more. And we're done! I actually feel out of breath. I feel like when I started talking about that Taylor Jenkins Reid book, I got very irate. But yeah, I hope you've got something out of this, and there was at least one book there that you want to read, because there were some good ones despite the run of bad ones, but you know, you might enjoy the bad ones, so let me know if you've already read them and you did. But otherwise, thank you for watching this wrap up. Like I said, go watch my May, middle grade May wrap up, and I've also got loads of other videos obviously that I'm sure you will adore, so go watch them as well. And if not, please subscribe to my channel, please like this video, and I will see you next time. Bye!